this is the month where we're going to jump to doing 5 years apart instead of 10 years apart of White Dwarf. So that means we're looking at 1985 and 1990 and October 1990. Oh, what an issue for us to jump into, eh? We're going to crack straight on. We'll probably look at 1985 first, as we tend to do the earlier one first. But this is a stonker of an issue, so don't go away. We'll get there. Right, let's go back in time. Okay, here we go. So, October 1985, when I was 1 year old. Here's an interesting cover. Perhaps the weirdest version of Pin the Tail on the Donkey ever played. But there you go, fantasy times in it. What have we got in this episode? Ian Livingstone mourns the demise of what magazine was it called? Imagine. There you go, the other apparently role-playing magazine at the time, leaving only White Dwarf in the market. I'm sure he does more than that. Here's a discussion of languages in D&D, thinking it's a little bit unfair perhaps that non-human races seem to be able to manage loads of different languages, whereas human races are very much the English and unable to speak anything other than their own basic tongue, which seems pretty fair. But there you go. Some more Traveller's character studies, a particular bunch of nasties for Golden Heroes. Marcus Rowland discusses pricing, relative pricing in Call of Cthulhu for people who want to set it in England of the 1920s. Here's what you can expect to pay for certain items in England in the 1920s. Open Box discusses a bunch of more D&D and also the AD&D battle system for fighting not mass but larger scale encounters on the tabletop. So a rival to Warhammer Fantasy, and obviously he does not rate it as highly necessarily as Warhammer Fantasy, but gives it quite a high rating. I've never played it myself, so be interesting if any of you have played it. What do you think of it? Here is a Golden Heroes adventure, which is a follow-on from the one that was apparently in the rulebook itself. I'm rushing quite quickly through these because there's quite a lot in this issue, and there's even more in the 1990 issue. I do want to get there. We take a look at the Arcane Architecture Blood on the Streets village pack. This was cardboard scenery for Warhammer. A bunch of the stuff that had already appeared in the Lichmaster and Orcs Drift scenario packs, but some other new stuff as well, and then that all got bundled into the Townscapes pack a bit later on. Here's a bounty hunter career in Traveller with a ship that looks like a slightly modified version of Slave Boba Fett's ship, but why not? And here we get to a aquatic adventure for D&D as a follow-on for those two looks at how to run aquatic adventures in that system. Now we're looking at what you can do with that, and actually a lot of this scenario takes place above water. There is a little bit underwater when they get involved with the merfolk, and I guess it's relying on the other two articles to discuss how you manage it, because there's no discussion in this article as to how these humans are suddenly able, or humans, elves, dwarves, these Turanian races are suddenly able to breathe underwater in this merfolk place. So I guess the idea is that they have to take that into account from the previous articles, because there's no discussion of it there. Then we have some more creatures that might live in the depths. Again, an interesting discussion of why certain creatures may act in certain ways based on their habitats, but very much based on what's in the monster manuals already, with some adjustments. Thrud the Barbarian decides that he might take to the sea and become Thrud the Pirate, but that doesn't go so well. We discuss monsters as not just monsters, monsters having personalities and characters. Excellent, all for that. Some basic advice on conversions in part of Tabletop Heroes, including a nice picture of a before and after John Blanche chopped round, classic dinosaur with a plastic saxophone, a chopped orc here changed to a sci-fi orc with this rather fancy 80s visor that he's got on. Some nice work, and some discussion of how to go about it if you're unfamiliar with that. Gobbledygook gets another whole page to himself and gets sent on an errand for the wizard, which doesn't go so well, because why would you send Gobbledygook on an errand? It's not like he's the most reliable. There we go, that was a quick run through. Now we get on to the exciting edition. First off, look at this cover. This cover is Les Edwards, of course. This is the cover of Return of the Witchlord, the Hero Quest supplement pack. Unfortunately, we've missed in a couple of previous issues to this the discussions of Hero Quest and Advanced Hero Quest, so less of that in issues to come, but this piece had still not been used for a cover, so it makes sense to use it. But what we are going to find in here, which is exciting, apart from photos of the greens of Jez Goodwin's excellent Eldar Exarchs, you can tell from the reflections on the surfaces that these are greens and not the metal castings. And it's interesting how they've outlined the bits where he's used plasticard to make the sword and axe elements, and they haven't photographed for a while, so they've drawn that in digitally, which is cool. But the exciting thing is, no, not just really cool heavy metal pages. I mean, look how different these are to the ones 5 years later. No real sense of sort of uniformity here. It's far more eclectic mix of bits and pieces. And I know this is showcasing the studio staff's individual styles, but even so, it's far more interesting mix of painting. But this is where it gets exciting, right? Confrontation. This was the first appearance of Necromunda as a setting, and this the original Confrontation rule set is a percentile-based system. It's kind of loosely rooted in things like Laserburn that came out before, but far more rooted in the kind of earlier semi-roleplay games, Legends of the Old West and things like that, which are all percentile based, and was the forerunner to Inquisitor. So not only did Necromunda follow this on, and next video we're going to be looking at 1995, which is the introduction of Necromunda. So this actually took 5 years, not Confrontation, that disappeared off the boards after I think 4 issues. But Necromunda then took 5 years to re-emerge as the game Necromunda. And then after that, Inquisitor is not this rule set, but is far more similar to this rule set than anything previous. And this introductory episode or issue is just article, that's the word I want, introductory article, is just looking at the history and the makeup of Necromunda, its hives, its social structure, and of course the living conditions, which are so much a part of the game. And it's everything that I loved about Necromunda when it first came out, because it's set in a sort of civilian setting. It's a close-up look at one world. It's not the big kind of armies stomping across the battlefield that we've seen previously. This is a lot more dark and gritty. You can very definitely see the 2000 AD nods to it. And the artwork here by Tony Ackland and John Blanche has done some of it as well. And Martin McKenna as well, doing these great concepts for this Underhive gang war thing that no one had seen before. Completely new setting. Jez Goodwin concept sketch there for Imperial Arbites. And over the next few issues we'll have the rest of the game, because they released the whole thing in White Dwarf as a sort of, is anyone interested in this kind of thing? So more looking at the eclectic mix of heavy metal painters. And I really like this basing style, although these look a little bit green in the photos. I'm pretty sure these are black rimmed bases with the green tops, and I'm a big fan of a black rimmed base for sure. I think it shows off the figure really nicely. Keep this in mind for the next episode as well, because here we have a short story with Inquisitor Cryptman looking at this Tyrannid artifact and the demise of the poor Psyker that he gets to investigate it. But yeah, keep that in mind when we look at the next episode. Chivalry. Here's another game. This is an entire game that the Perrys have been working on. It's a card game, so you cut out these cards and then you have a hand of cards and you play an attack card, and then your opponent can play a defense card. I don't get the impression that it'll be a very interesting game to play, but it's a different kind of combat mechanic. Yeah, different way of fighting battles. Here's a discussion of how to run a gaming league. A few adverts are still in here. Look, we've got an advert for some Terry Pratchett stuff. Truckers and Wings. Not Diggers, apparently. We've got Truckers the first part and Wings the final part. Where's Diggers? Maybe they couldn't fit them in. A discussion of the Capital Imperialis and Hell War for Epic, or Space Marine in fact. Mighty Empires was launched. Here's a look at Mighty Empires. Possibly the dullest board game that Games Workshop ever produced. But okay, if you're running it as a campaign system, which is what it was envisaged as. So if you're using it as your campaign map and you're playing between players and you're actually fighting battles in between, doing all of the endless dice rolling that really you could automate now and it would be fine. It just requires no human agency whatsoever to roll a bunch of dice and go, oh, this is happening, then this is happening, then this is happening, then this is happening. You really do want a game in between those periods for you to actually play something. So as a board game in its own right, no, not interested, but as a campaign system, yeah, okay, has some interest. And also, Dave Andrews and Phil Lewis embark upon a series of modelling workshop articles teaching you how to make old school buildings, which of course weren't old school buildings then, they were just cardboard buildings, or actually plasticard buildings, or foam core buildings rather. Yeah, I'm not sure, I certainly never had access to foam core back then. I have now through being an architecture technician, but back in the day, no, everything was cereal box card, but certainly built a fair few of these houses. And these houses actually, a bunch of these houses are still on display in the cabinets at Foundry. They still look just like this. They're great pieces of Warhammer history to look at. And of course, Dave Andrews went on to do loads of scenic building, including the basic models for those plastic kits that Games Workshop ended up releasing that now go for ridiculous amounts of money. But this I think was what it's all about. You know, it's all about making your own stuff, crafting stuff. That's where the hobby element for me is. When it's all just like collect this plastic building, or even like download this STL file and print this building and paint it up. That's not interesting for me. The interest is in making stuff from scratch and having something that's completely unique and individual. And here for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, because we still have elements of roleplay in White Dwarf, although on the cover it's a monthly games magazine, not a role-playing games monthly magazine. But Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is still getting some time and space in White Dwarf here. And this is a setting, the Great Hospice, which is a kind of asylum, featured in the novel Drachenfels, which I tried to read and I got 2 chapters in maybe and gave up because it was so awfully written. But a lot of people rave about it, so I guess there's a nostalgia thing. If you read it as a teenager, you probably weren't aware of how literally terrible it is. But as a setting, and I think, was it Flame Publishing did Drachenfels as a full campaign system, as a full campaign setting. Yeah, far more interesting to do, I guess, as a roleplay campaign. And this even, you know, just take this out and put it individually. There's so much care and attention put here into the details of what goes on in this asylum, some of the inmates, some of the staff. You could come up with all kinds of little side adventures and side quests to do with this. And in fact, here they are. You know, there's a bunch of ideas here. To mention nothing of the fact that you've got to somehow get into the asylum and then convince the people in charge of the asylum that you're well enough to leave again, which is no mean feat. So yeah, that's a fun thing. And it's worth noticing, I don't know if you can see on here, let's find a page where it's really clear, these little binder holes here, the idea being that you cut the pages out of White Dwarf and you use them in your in a particular binder. So you might have a Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay binder that has all of these bits cut out of White Dwarf in it. You might have your Warhammer 40,000 one, your Space Hulk one, your Confrontation one. So you're collecting all of these articles into binders of the right type so that you're just looking in one place, which is a cool idea. I don't know that anyone did. I'm glad nobody cut these ones up. I like to read through the actual magazine as a whole thing. The bright and colourful Marauder Chaos Thugs got released. Quite keen on these models. There was a time when I went into a shop in Western Supermare that used to have a box of figures. This was about 10 years ago, and they were £1 each. And I remember they had loads and loads of these guys. And I was humming and hawing over whether to buy them, and I decided not to in the end. even as an investment. I should have bought them back in the day. There you go, never mind. And some excellent conversions and paint jobs here by Francis Alliard. Converted Commissar, a Marine Scout in very much non-standard marine attire. This is when there weren't any, well, there were particular chapters and things, but people were still free and easy with the way that they were designing stuff. We're still Rogue Trader era here. Evil Sun's Cyborg, Zebra Centaurs. It's just, there's so much texture and interesting colour in these paint jobs of this era. And here's John Blanche and co talking about, and Mike McVie of course talking about how they did this. And here are what I think of as some quite modern Space Marines. I associate these with the second ed plastic boxes that came out, but no, they came out in this Space Marine Strike Force much earlier than I thought. You got 18 of them in a pack. When I was buying these, you got 6, I think, or 5 or 6 in a pack. Oh, 15 in there. Yeah, 3 squads of 5, so yeah, it must have been 5 in a pack. Yeah, it went down to like 5 of these in a pack for £5, which even then wasn't terrible value, especially considering the thick enamel paint jobs that I ended up putting on them. But they were not painted like this on the cover. They were painted in the sort of red era bright colours. I much prefer these kind of muted, more interesting looking earthy colours. Jervis Johnson is on tour, being a rock star in the States. And here are those Aspect Warriors, this time the metal versions of the Aspect Warriors. And of course, a dramatic encounter between rival Bretonnian forces. If I can zoom in on that. Yeah, they could be Bretonnian forces, or they could just be like 100 Years' War historical soldiers. I think they are all Citadel figures, but they're very much the kind of, I think, does Foundry sell them as feudal style, these ones? Perry's historical sculpts, to go with, of course, the chivalry article in here, which is all historical, although it does say, you can make this fantasy if you like, but it's essentially it's set up as a historical thing. So there we go. There is our run through of not a decade, half a decade apart. White Dwarf, still very different worlds, and interestingly very different from this era even to the one that we're going to look at next, which is October 1995. So yeah, join me next year. Next year? No, not next year. Join me next time, next week, much sooner than that, next week to take a look through this one and watch me get very excited about it.